Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We are coming to you from GearFest 2012 here at Sweetwater, and I am joined by bassist, jazz composer, film score composer, arranger, producer extraordinaire, Marcus Miller. Thanks for coming in, man. Appreciate it.
How you doing?
Doing great, doing great.
Great.
Mostly because I just caught the end of your workshop that you were doing here at
Oh,
GearFest, and there was so much great stuff there, and thanks for doing that. We really appreciate it.
oh, nice. We had a good time. I mean, it was a big full room, and the people seemed really like they had some questions. You know, it
Yeah,
was nice. They really seemed interested, so it was very nice.
yeah, it came off great. Came off great. So you actually started playing at, I read you were working in New York at the age of 15, is that correct?
Yeah, in New York, if you're born and raised, I think in one respect you have a little advantage because everybody else has to finish high school at least, and then move to New York, establish themselves, maybe get a job to make ends meet, and then try to get on the scene.
Right.
Because I was born and raised, I got started early, you know what I mean? So by 15, 16 years old, I was already working, you know, I could still live at my parents' house, so it wasn't like I had to worry about getting a job, you know what I mean? So
Right.
got started pretty early.
So what kind of gigs were you doing at that age?
I was doing, at 15, I was doing like jazz funk gigs, like Bobby Humphrey, Lonnie Liston Smith, and then, but also everything else because it was New York, so I was playing on African sessions, you know, I was playing calypso gigs, you know, Caribbean music, I was playing Latin gigs, I was playing straight ahead jazz gigs, you know,
Right.
everything, you know, from a very, very young age. So it was a really cool environment.
Right. So absorbing all those influence, that had to make a big difference in the way that you've evolved as a player and as a composer as well.
I think that there are a lot of styles that I can play with conviction, you know, convincingly because I started playing those styles
Right.
at an early age. You know, it's like language. The later you start, the more accent you have. You know what I
Right.
mean? So,
Right. Now, how did you make the jump from those kind of gigs into more of the studio focused things and to working with some of the major artists you've worked with?
well, you know, again, I'm in New York and I'm playing with different people, live gigs, and then you know somebody will say, hey, you know, I got a demo in the studio. Can you come play bass? So you know, you start by doing a bunch of demos. I think for the first year, maybe year and a half, nothing I played on in the studio ever got released. There was a bunch of demos for different people.
Right.
But eventually, you know, you start getting recommended, you know, to other people who actually are a little bit higher, you know, level musically. And then next thing you know, you're on the studio scene.
Right.
I started, I was playing with a flute player named Bobby Humphrey, very popular flute player in the late 70s in her band. And she said to me, I'm getting ready to go in the studio to record my next album. And Ralph McDonald is going to be my producer, who's a very well-known producer at the time. He's a percussionist, and he wrote Where Is the Love for Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway. He wrote
Sure.
Just the Two of Us for Grover Washington and Bill Withers. Anyway, he was a producer. So I gave her one of my little tunes that I written. I said, check my tune out. She said, I like this tune. I want to record it on my album. I said, well, see if they'll let me play bass, you know, because
Right.
I know they have their big studio musicians, you know, who usually do the sessions. But Bobby went to bat for me, and Ralph said, yeah, send your little kid bass player in, you know. So I came in, and the band was like, Steve Gadd was on drums, and Richard T was on the piano, and Anthony Jackson was playing bass.
Wow.
And they said, Anthony, we got this kid, he's going to play bass on this one song. So Anthony had to get up. It was kind of uncomfortable, but
Yeah. Right.
he was real gracious, you know, he's real cool.
Right.
And I went and played my little song, you know what I mean? It was pretty uneventful. And they said, great. And the song came out, and it was fine. But it didn't have the impact I wanted it. So the next year, Bobby got to do another album with Ralph. And I wrote another song. And this time I put a bass solo in the song.
Right.
So Bobby liked the song. She pitched it to Ralph. Ralph liked it. And she said, can I have my guy? He said, well, he was fine last time, sure. So this time I came in, and I had my little bass solo that I could do, you know. So Ralph, who was playing percussion on the session, he'd look over. So after the session, he said to me, can you read music? Because I'm thinking about recommending you to some of these, you know, some of these other producers. And I said, yeah, I can read music. He said, don't bullshit me, really, can you read music? I said, no, I can. If a fly poops on music paper, I can read that. So he said, okay, I'm going to call you. So he said, join Registry. Registry was, this was before cell phones and all that stuff. So Registry was a place where you put your name in. So if anyone was looking for you, they could call the service.
Right.
And then you'd call in later in the day and they say, so-and-so's looking for you. So I joined Registry, you know. A few weeks went by, and I was trying to impress one of my friends. And I said, I'm going to call my service, see if there's any work for me. You know what I mean? I was 19, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I said, hey, Reggie, it's Marcus Mitty. I'm so glad you called. We've been looking for you all day. You know, we have a 9 to 10 with a possible 20 A&R 799. I said, whoa, slow down. I don't know what any of that means. What are you talking about? She says, it's a music for a commercial. And it's going to start from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. It might go overtime by 20 minutes. And it's at A&R. There's 2 A&R studios. One's 799 Broadway. The other one's on 48th Street. This one's on Broadway. Can you make it? I said, yeah. So I made it. Ralph was there, you know, and it was, like I said, it was a commercial. And I read the music. It was, you know, it was fine. And within a month, I was working 7 days a week.
Wow.
You know, from morning through the night. Jingles, and then those turned into record dates. And I think that's how it really got started.
Right. Right. Well, that's a great story. I love that you took the initiative and kind of put your bass solo in there. You know.
Yeah,
you
I didn't know if I was thinking
right?
clearly, but I mean, something told me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would like to, like, since it's not going to be so difficult to get in this time, maybe I can open up a little bit.
Right. But I think so many musicians are passive about it. They're like, I'll sit at home and I'll practice and I'll be a great reader and a great player, but they never put themselves out there and really make that leap of, you know, kind of going after it a little bit more.
That was important then, and it's even more important now. You know, because then there was a huge studio scene and people were actively looking for musicians who played with fire and who could also read. You know what I mean? It was really necessary. Now there's no studio scene like that. You know what I mean? So you really have to kind of figure out a way to make people pay attention. You know? Very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you make the connection with Miles Davis?
You know, he was in retirement from mid-'70s to the beginning of the '80s. And in the beginning of the '80s, he began to put a band together to try to make a comeback. And, you know, he called some of his older musicians, and they recommended a young saxophone player named Bill Evans. And Bill Evans was the guy, his connection to the young New York scene. Bill Evans was a young saxophonist in New York.
Right.
And he was the guy who knew what was happening in New York. So Miles said, I need a funky bass player. And Bill Evans said, call Marcus. And Miles called me, and we did a session for an album called The Man with the Horn. And from that point, I joined his band, and that was how the relationship started.
Right, right. And you ended up writing a lot of material for him as well.
After 2 years in the band, I told him I wanted to leave the touring band because I wanted to focus on my writing and my production and stuff like that. And he gave me his blessing. And then I heard a couple of years later that he was moving from Columbia to Warner Brothers. And the A&R guy at Warner Brothers, Tommy LaPuma, told me, Miles wants to go in a different direction. You got any music? You know? And he played me something that George Duke had written for Miles, which was very contemporary, very much sounding of that particular time, you know?
Right.
So I got excited, man, and I started writing stuff, and that's how, like, my second relationship with Miles started.
So at this point, do you consider yourself more a bassist, more of a composer? How do you classify yourself?
I classify myself as a musician, you know what I mean?
Right.
When I was coming up, man, I had a lot of mentors, you know, great musicians in my area in New York that I grew up in, called Jamaica Queens. And they would all say to me, you're not a complete musician unless you're writing and you're arranging and you're playing the hell out of your instrument, you know what I mean? They really encourage you to be a complete musician. It was kind of like a New York mentality as well. You know?
Right.
And I carried that with me, you know what I mean? So it just seemed like a natural extension to write, to arrange. And for the people who I'd say, hey man, you writing any songs? He says, no, I'm not a composer. I play bass. I go, well, that's a weird distinction. That's like, I play offense, but I don't play defense. You know what I mean? As an athlete, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
It didn't seem like the complete picture to me.
Right, right. Now, in the seminar that you just gave, the workshop, some of the questions that came up, I thought you had really interesting answers to. And there were two things that really jumped out to me. One was you were talking about establishing the groove and then being able to work with that, you know, play behind the beat, in front of the beat. Can you talk a little bit about how somebody can develop that kind of a feel? Are there exercises they can do, or how do you recommend somebody work on that?
I think the exercise is to go to your local rib joint and find a jukebox and put on Jimmy Smith. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it's a feeling in your body. You know what I mean? And if you see people doing it, if you hear musicians playing it and audience reacting to it,
Right.
especially at a young age, it gets into your bones. You know what I mean? It's really like if you listen to hip hoppers when they rap, a lot of times they do that. You know what I mean? Because whatever word they're trying to say for emphasis, they'll slow down so you can really hear the word, and it pulls them behind the beat. You know what I mean? and that tension, you know, like really interesting. I was working on a project where we were combining opera with jazz, right? I was working with this great operatic tenor named Ken Hicks, right? And he said, listen, when I sing this line here, I'm going to stretch this note out. So I need you guys to wait. You're conducting the orchestra. Hold the orchestra up until I finish with the note, and then we continue.
Right.
I said, nah, man. In jazz, we don't wait for anybody. The beat never stops. You got to figure out how to catch up.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
when you listen to Billie Holiday or Nina Simone, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, you hear them. They go behind the beat. The rhythm just keeps going, and then you got to catch up. That's what's falling behind the beat, you know?
Right.
But there's lots of different subtle variations of it, you know what I mean, where you can just pull back a little bit. It has a great feeling when you catch up. Or getting in front of the beat sometimes. You know, Jaco Pastorius was a really big influence. I really love the way he plays.
Sure.
And on those up tempos, sometimes he'd be playing just a little faster than everybody else, which made it sound even that more exciting. You know?
You got drive behind it.
You know what I mean? It felt like whoa, you know. You know, so it's not just behind; it's ahead. You know, it's all sorts of different things that you can do, but it's very subtle. It's not rushing, which is a different thing. You know?
Yeah, you were saying you really have to establish the beat so that you can play with it. If it's not established, then it's just washing around.
A lot of hip hoppers are really taking it to the extreme now, where the snare drum's on the beat, right? But the hi-hat's a little bit off, and they're doing it with machines, so hi-hat's a little bit the same amount off every time. You know what I mean? And the singers are singing behind the beat. If you listen to a D'Angelo record, you'll hear him singing back there. And it's just the new cats listening to the old cats and trying to make that same feeling, but with their own technology, their own instruments, you know?
Right, right. The other thing you were talking about was tone. And I come to it from, I'm a guitar player, so I think of it in terms of bedroom tone and stage tone. And you were kind of talking
There you
about
go.
the same thing with bass. And
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, you were saying that there are kind of two different approaches. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when I was a kid in my bedroom, I had my amp right next to my bed, and I came up with the most perfect tone anyone's ever heard.
Right.
It was warm, it sounded beautiful, right? And I wrote down the settings on my amp, and when I went to do a gig, I put it on the most perfect tone in the world setting, and it sounded like mud. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you have a bunch of people playing, those other instruments, they absorb some of the frequencies. You know, like if you have highs on your bass, but you're playing with a guitar player, a lot of those highs aren't going to come through. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And on a bass guitar, the sound that's the most like unpleasing is the sound that you need a little bit of in a band. That mid-range sound that makes it sound a little bit like this, you know, that's the sound that gets you through the band and makes people, you absolutely need the low end to support the band, but for your clarity, you need to have a little bit of the highs. So for me, it's about trying to find the balance, trying to make it sound like the bedroom tone on the stage, you know,
Right.
which is a different sound.
Right, right. Now, part of your tone is that you now have a number of signature items that you work with. Can you tell us about the signature bass?
The bass, my Marcus Miller model bass is modeled after my 1977 bass that I've been playing since '77. They, you know, put lasers on it to make sure that the whole thing feels exactly the same, which it does.
Nice.
And then, you know, and then they added the modifications that I've done to that bass since, which aren't a lot, but the bridge is different. It's a badass bridge, and there's a preamp on the bass that gives you the ability to add highs or lows.
Okay.
You know, so either here or here. It leaves the mid-range alone. So if you use the preamp a certain way, the highs get extended, the lows get extended, and it sounds like the mid-range recedes. You know what I mean? Or that's the impression you get.
Right.
So it sounds very warm with a little silver thing on the top, which is the sound that I've used for a long time, you know. So
Right.
that's the bass. I have a preamp, rack-mounted preamp that I developed with Fender, which is was actually at SWR, which is really cool. And it you know, for people who don't want to put the preamp on their bass, because a lot of people like the sound of the bass and it feels weird to cut it up and add things.
Right.
So you just put your passive bass in this preamp, and you can do the things that the preamp does. You can do it, you know, in the rack, and it's really cool. So doing that, we have a speaker enclosure that's very nice. It's very light, 4-speaker, 410s, which is really nice, clear sound, but it still has a nice punchy
Nice
type
bottom
bottom.
end, yeah. Yeah, and then strings as well, right? DR signature
DR
strings?
strings, there's two. I use high beams and fat beams,
Mm-hmm.
right? The high beams a little bit more high-tech sounding, a little bit more uh, glassy on the top, and the fat beams a little bit more growly. You know what I
Okay.
mean? So, when you want to get a little bit of, when it makes your face go like that, you use the fat beams.
Right, right. So you're really custom tailoring.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. And you have a new album coming out, Renaissance?
Got a new album called Renaissance. Really excited. I kind of haven't done a studio album in maybe 5 years. After 5 years ago, after that album, I said, you know what, I'm gonna go in a different direction, but I need to collect some experiences first. Because I think it's really important to know that your music comes from your life. You know what I mean? Your music doesn't come from like your bass or your guitar. I mean, that's your tool.
Mm-hmm.
But what you feel, what you're living is important. That's why everybody's first album is so cool, because the first album is basically the collection of all your life experiences up until 22 years old when you're making your first album.
Right.
The second album is the last 18 months. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's so difficult to follow up your first album. So I decided to just kind of put myself in some different situations. I did a live record with an orchestra in France, which was pretty cool. It was called A Night in Monte Carlo. I did a project with 3 bass players, myself and Victor Wooten and Stanley Clark,
Right.
called SMV. We did a tour called the Thunder Tour, which was really nice and really different. Then I did Tutu Revisited, where I got some young musicians and we reinterpreted some music that I written for Miles back in the 80s. And then I just did it turns out it's 20 years since Miles passed last year. So Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, and myself put together a group, and we toured Europe with another tribute to Miles.
Nice.
So these experiences were nice, and I kind of felt refreshed and had some new ideas. The Tutu Revisited thing with the young musicians really inspired me.
Mm-hmm.
I decided that I was going to write some music, not just do the old music from 25 years ago, but I was going to write some new music for these guys.
Right.
And so that's the kind of inspiration for Renaissance.
Right, nice. And that's out in August.
Out in August, yeah.
All right, we'll
August
watch
7th.
for that. We'll watch for
Thank
that.
you, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in. We really enjoyed having you here. The workshop was awesome.
Thank you. My
And,
pleasure.
Yeah, it's just a great pleasure to have you here with us at Sweetwater.
All right, thank you.
You bet. I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.